Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us this morning. It has been a bit of a hectic time the last few days with the surprise announcement. I think most of us were surprised by the New South Wales government's announcement on Saturday with the shutdown of the construction industry. I did get a lot of comments on social from people who have been shut down for already 3 weeks. That we all know now what they feel like. But it obviously was a big shock to a lot of people, considering it didn't happen last year. So because of that, we decided, I spoke with Greg Mitchell from HR Success, who I'll introduce in a minute. Spoke with him on the weekend, and we decided to run this webinar. And Greg also put out some information in a blog, which was an excellent blog that shared some of the considerations that you need to think about and options that you have for managing your team during this shutdown. And Greg will be going through that today as well. So as I said, welcome. I know everyone's busy and I really appreciate you taking the time out for today. So just a very quick introduction to myself. I think most of you on the call know me, a lot don't. So I'm the director of Chan & Naylor Business Coaching, and Chan & Naylor is a national accounting, finance and advisory group. And I head up the business coaching division nationally. I am an accountant by training, but I don't do any accounting work for clients now. And a lot of the support payments and that is available from the government, you really need to talk to your accountant. Now, I've got a fair understanding of how it all works, but the accountants are actually going in and doing calculations and helping their clients do the applications and so on. So really would encourage you to speak to your accountant. They should be the expert, but I will be covering off some information about the support that is available. So I generally work with businesses in as I've listed there, construction, trades, warehousing, industrial and professional services. And a lot of my clients have been impacted by Saturday's announcement. Luckily, they weren't impacted last year because a lot of them weren't in those industries, but definitely this time around they have been. Greg, I'll get you to introduce yourself. I think you're on mute, Greg. There you go.
I missed the button. So anyway, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Anil. So I think I know a lot of you, but certainly not some of you. So just by way of introduction, my business is called HR Success. We've also got another business called Short and Sharp Training. We've been based in Penrith for close to 15 years now, so time flies. Someone must be having fun. And we, myself and my colleague Margot, senior consultant Margot, Margot's on the call today and helping us manage the chat and the questions and all that sort of stuff. So we provide a range of HR support as well as leadership coaching, training, workplace culture, engagement, teamwork training, that sort of thing, as well as recruitment. And of course, what we're talking about today, which I would regard as part of our HR risk management strategy, helping small businesses particularly navigate all the risks and so on that come with managing and engaging staff in a business. So that's a little bit about us. And Margot and I, we each have over 25 years experience. So we've been around the traps, as they say. So that's a little bit about us. We'll move on to the presentation now, if you would, Anil.
Thanks, Greg. So just a very quick overview of what we will cover. Obviously, there are, the key part of it, what are employers doing to navigate the challenges currently? The stand downs, the options there, and in relation to the Fair Work Act, which obviously Greg's the expert in. What if we can't stand down staff, but business conditions are poor? So Greg will talk about that. I will give a brief summary of the available government support. The reason I'm doing that is because there have been some presentations over the last couple of weeks that I've been involved in, not that I've run those. And those presentations were accurate last week and the week before, probably, but there have been changes. So I will be covering off the main support that's available. I'm not going to go through it in too much detail, but there are some changes that have happened over the last week or so that you need to understand as well. Okay, so and then obviously we'll open it up to Q&A. I suspect we'll have quite a few questions. So I will hand over to Greg to present most of the information going forwards.
Okay, thanks, Anil. So just a few points by way of introduction. First of all, I just think it's important to note that while some things are clear, some things are not. And it's, as I've got there, just about all of it is difficult. We're talking about a difficult situation. It's affecting your businesses, it's affecting your employees, it's affecting livelihoods. So, you know, it's a really challenging time for all of us for a number of different reasons. As much as we can make things clear today, we will do that. Obviously, as I say, some things are just not clear. But if there's specific questions or things that you need help with beyond the session, please reach out to myself or Margot. Our email addresses are in the screen there, and Anil's going to circulate this after the session. So another point to make at this stage is that a lot of what I talk about will relate to the legislation, particularly the Fair Work Act. Awards, agreements and contracts, and even in some cases internal policies, can have provisions that vary the arrangements under the legislation. So, you know, we're going to talk generally about what the legislative provisions are, but just could be mindful that individual awards, agreements, contracts, etc., can impact some of what we might cover today. So you just need to be aware of that at this stage. It is just a general disclaimer, it is general information that we're providing today. This is not legal advice. My insurance doesn't quite cover us for that. But as I say, both Margot and I have been around for more than 25 years in this space, so we like to think we know what we're doing, but this is not legal advice. Nor does it cover your specific circumstances, obviously. If you need that sort of help, then please do reach out to us. There is information available on the Fair Work website. Please make sure that you are looking at the government website, the Fair Work Ombudsman site. That's the link there. There is lots of good information there. Pretty much everything that I get and that I've put in the presentation is from that website, but it is difficult to navigate. So really what we've tried to do today is to distill the key points of the information that's available and put those into the presentation for you today. And there's a final note on that screen about amendments to the Fair Work Act. So those of us that had the opportunity to access the JobKeeper scheme last year and into the start of this year, there were some major changes to the Fair Work Act, which made a lot of the management of staff around during these difficult times easier and simpler. So there were provisions that allowed, provided more scope for stand downs, for example. There were provisions that allowed you to direct people under certain conditions to reduce hours of work. Unfortunately, those flexibilities ended at the end of March, I think it was. So they are no longer available, and the government, you know, doesn't seem to be taking steps to make them available again. So, you know, what you might have known last year may not necessarily be the case this year. Right, Anil, if you could flick on to the next one, please. Okay, so just a general point, what are employers doing to navigate the changes? At this stage, I'm saying to the 30th of July, because that's when, you know, the current very tight restrictions apply. I think there's a reasonable expectation that it will probably be extended, but just a point of note that a lot of the information I'm sharing relates to this particular lockdown with these restrictions, which currently apply to the 30th of July. So what are employers doing? Well, there's a lot of employers that are standing down employees. Stand downs are generally without pay, and they're available in some circumstances. So we will cover the circumstances in which a stand down is an option today. Where that's not available, or even if it is available and an employer for whatever reason doesn't want to direct a stand down, they are tending to negotiate other arrangements with their employees. So that might be, for example, taking leave, reducing their hours of work, or changing their work location. So the presentation, or my part of the presentation today, will basically cover those two key areas around stand downs and then negotiating other arrangements. I've just got an early note on that screen because this is something that's come up, very frequently over the last few weeks. And there seems to be a few myths around about what you can and can't do as an employer. So I just want to put it out there, and we will cover it during the presentation. Generally speaking, an employer cannot direct an employee to take annual leave. So you cannot just call the guys up and say, well, sorry guys, but you're all on annual leave this week. Legally, you can't direct an employee to take annual leave, but for particular and very narrow circumstances, which I will refer to during the presentation. The next point there is employers cannot unilaterally make a decision to reduce an employee's hours of work. So they're things that both annual leave and reduction to hours of work are things that you need to negotiate with your employees on most occasions. So we will talk a bit more about that, but I just wanted to put those out there because there seem to be some common misunderstandings about those things. All right, so the first area that we'll talk about in a bit more detail is stand downs. So there are stand down provisions under the Fair Work Act. As I said, there were changes to this part of the legislation that were introduced last year as part of the JobKeeper scheme. Those changes are no longer valid, so we're back to the standard provisions under the Fair Work Act. So we will talk about those in a moment. But just to make the point also that some awards, some enterprise agreements, some contracts that you might have with your employees may actually also make reference to stand down provisions. And if you have an award or an agreement or a contract with an employee that makes reference to stand down provisions, you need to use or refer to and utilise those provisions within those other documents as opposed to the Fair Work Act. So, you need to check those things just to see whether in fact there are stand down provisions or not. So the rest of it we'll talk about are the provisions within the Fair Work Act relating to stand downs. So they should be considered a last resort, I guess is the first point. It is difficult. It does affect an employee's livelihood. We're going through difficult times as business owners, of course, but we need to acknowledge the challenges that stand downs without pay can bring to employees. So we should really consider them to be a last resort. So under the general provisions of the Fair Work Act, employers may be able to stand down employees without pay where there's a sudden workplace closure that is outside the employee's control. So there's a couple of key points even in that sentence. One is that there needs to be a workplace closure and it needs to be the result of something that is outside the employer's control. So the couple of examples that are quoted in the legislation are where there's an enforceable government direction. So in some ways, if you're in the construction industry, it's challenging, I realise that, but from a legislative point of view, it's easier at the moment to issue a stand down order because there's a clear enforceable government direction that prevents you from going about your business. So it's pretty clear in those circumstances that you're able to stand down employees without pay. The other example that's referenced in the legislation is where there's a stoppage of work due to lack of supply for which the employer can't be held responsible. So in that case, for example, it might be that you rely on products or you rely on imported products and you're using them within your business to sell on to customers or whatever. and there's just because of the government restrictions and whatnot, that's those supplies of those goods are just not coming into the country, and therefore you've got nothing to sell to your clientele. In that circumstance, that's another example in which a stand down could well apply. So generally speaking, I think the point I'd like to make about that is that employers are, for good and proper reason, I might say, applying fairly liberal interpretation to all that. Now, and the recent experience since COVID is that employees are generally accepting of that liberal interpretation because they understand the challenges that the business is facing. I'm not aware, to be perfectly honest, of too many legal cases in recent times during COVID where stand downs have been challenged. But it's not a free-for-all. You can't use the Fair Work provisions, as it says in the bottom point there. You can't use it just because there's been a significant decline in revenue. It actually has to be because there's been some level of workplace closure for reasons outside of your control as an employer. So as I say, I think there's been a bit of a liberal interpretation. If there is a government direction, it's fairly clear that you would, in that circumstance, be able to justify a stand down. If you don't have an enforceable government direction upon your business that prevents you from opening, or there's not that sort of supply issue, then it starts to get a little bit more grey, and you might like to seek some further advice if that's the situation. And keep in mind with the government directions, of course, at this stage, they do apply to the 30th of July. Okay, so a couple of other things about stand downs is that leave entitlements actually continue to accrue during a stand down. So even though your employees are not being paid for that period, you can pay them if you want, but generally speaking, that's a challenge for most small businesses at the moment. So even though they're not being paid, they do actually continue to accrue their leave entitlements. So their annual leave, their personal carers leave, their long service leave continues to accrue at the same rate. And the period of stand down is also deemed to be continuous. So ultimately, if you're making somebody redundant, for example, that period of stand down counts as service in terms of calculating their entitlement to any redundancy pay or period of notice, etc. Curiously, they're also entitled to any public holidays which may fall during a stand down period. I don't think we've got any public holidays coming up, so that's probably not relevant just at this stage. If you do feel that there's opportunity within your business because of a government order or something like that, or that lack of supply, and you feel that you can exercise the provisions in the Fair Work Act relating to stand downs, I would suggest before doing so that you check any awards, agreements, contracts, etc., for anything that might otherwise impact the exercising of those provisions in the Fair Work Act. I would recommend that you consult or communicate with staff before issuing the stand down, particularly if you're looking at standing down award-based staff. Pretty much all of the awards have consultation provisions that say, when you're considering a major change, you need to consult with employees. Now, that can be brief, and the reality is, it's going to be difficult for them to come up with an argument that's going to change your mind. But there is generally an award requirement if you're exercising major change, which may include a stand down, that you consult with employees before making that final decision. You also have a requirement where you're considering stand down to consider whether there's opportunity for people to otherwise be usefully engaged. So it might be, for example, that you can have people cleaning up the work depot or whatever it might be. It may be that you could have them working from home, of course, which is all the rage these days. Or it could be that you're just having them do alternate duties for a period of time. But there is a requirement before you issue a stand down order that you have gone through that exercise of considering opportunities for them to be otherwise engaged in productive work. And then if all that is done and you're ready to issue the stand down, you should do that. And I would certainly suggest that you do that in writing. There is a template available on the Fair Work website. So if you need help to find that, just reach out to us, obviously, and we'll help you out with that.
Greg, just a couple of points there that I'd like to pick up on, which has come up in conversations recently. I think it's important that this first point, they're effectively still employed. And I think I'll come back to that when we talk about some of the government support eligibility criteria. And this last point here, I did have a question from a client yesterday who I think sent his staff a text that because sites have to be closed, no work today, which was yesterday, and just we'll let you know what's happening. So obviously they would then need to put something in writing. As a letter by email, for example. Is that?
Yeah, I'd certainly suggest that. I mean, a text is okay in a sort of a semi-urgent situation, which it was on the weekend, but I'd certainly suggest that they follow that through with a formal letter.
Yeah. All right, thanks.
Okay, so employees that are stood down can request that they be paid available leave other than personal carers or compassionate leave during the period of stand down. Now, as an employer, you don't have to agree to that. It may be a case of you just can't afford it. You don't have the cash flow, but certainly employees have the opportunity to request that they be paid, their annual leave or long service leave for the period of stand down. There's also a note there that under many awards, so not all awards, it's important to note. So again, you need to understand which awards your employees are under and check them. But under a number of awards, there is a temporary change that allows people to access their annual leave at half pay. So that is, they take 1 week's leave, but they spread it over a 2-week period. So that's there if anybody wants to utilise that. Employees who are stood down as a result of the lockdown may be able to claim the COVID-19 disaster payment. So that, and Neil, I think we'll reference that briefly, but that is available through Services Australia. And you can see the dollar value of that there, depending on just how much work they're losing as a result of the stand down. And further note that applies to 30th of July at this stage. There's been a lot of debate or lack of clarity, if you like, around, well, what about if people take annual leave? Can they still access the payment? Our understanding is that, yes, an employer that is on stand down but elects to take a period of annual leave or long service leave just to keep some money coming in, they can do that, and they can also potentially access that payment, even though they're taking that leave. So that's our current understanding, and I've spoken to a few people who have actually made application, and they've been approved and got the payment. So.
Greg, just one question from Zoltan. He said, can stand down be on part pay, not half pay, but say 2 days per week as annual leave with employee agreement?
Yep, I'd say that would not be a stand down necessarily. That would be just a negotiation for a reduction of hours or for a temporary period, or it would be an employee by agreement with the employer, just deciding to take leave without pay for a few days a week. Yeah. So it would be more that arrangement as opposed to a stand down.
So you can't force them to, but you can agree with them to.
Yeah, so that's really the next part of the presentation, but yeah.
Okay, I'll let you get on with it.
Okay, so I guess that does bring us to this point. So that first part of the presentation really focusing on stand down. So there are some occasions, particularly if there's an enforced government direction, where a stand down is entirely appropriate and legit and all that sort of stuff. However, there are occasions where, you know, a stand down may not be a legitimate option. So what do you do in that case? You've not got enough money coming in the door. You haven't got enough work to keep people occupied. What can you do? So the answer there is really that you need to negotiate with your employees. So you can negotiate alternate work arrangements. As I said before, you know, get them cleaning, get them working on some systems, some procedures, all that stuff that we never quite get to. Now might be a good time for them to get on and do that other work, if that's meaningful and productive contribution to the business. You can negotiate with employees at any time changes to duties, work hours and rosters. Be sure to check any applicable awards, contracts and agreements for any provisions that may change the sort of general provisions around that. However, you can't direct or unilaterally make a decision to reduce a person's hours. You need to be very careful about that. The current experience is that most businesses that have a good relationship with their employees, the conversation is along the lines of, okay, guys, it's all a bit difficult at the moment and we need to work together to try and get through this. I don't want to end up having to do any redundancies or anything like that. I want us to keep together, keep the business going. So let's see what we can do. And in most circumstances, we're finding that most employers are pretty responsive to that, where they can see a sort of give and take from their employer. So you can negotiate changes to work hours and arrangements. You can also negotiate for employees to take a period of leave without pay, annual or long service leave, potentially, as I said, annual leave at half pay if those provisions are current within the applicable award. And we've got a client, for example, at the moment who I think they're paying their staff 3 days a week, and they've negotiated with their staff to take 2 days annual leave on those other days. So that's just something they've negotiated. But the key thing is that they have negotiated and there has been agreement of their employees to that. There are very few circumstances in which you can direct an employee to take annual leave. And those circumstances tend to be in some awards, or most awards it's there, where an employee has an excessive leave accrual, and it's usually something like over 8 weeks. So that's a lot of leave. And where you've tried but failed to reach an agreement with them for them to take that annual leave, you can, in those circumstances, direct them to take a bit of their annual leave, but the problem is that you need to give them a significant period of notice. So in a couple of the wards I was looking at yesterday, it was 8 weeks notice that you need to give of them to take the leave. So, you know, that doesn't help us in this current context. Okay, so employees, so really that's the option is really get out there, negotiate with your employees around just what you can do together to get through this. Employees who lose hours as a result of the lockdown may be able to claim the COVID-19 disaster payment. So again, the values are there. I showed those earlier. And that, I believe that's a pretty easy process. You know, I know people that applied on Monday, as in yesterday, and got paid today. Or are getting paid today. So it's a pretty quick and simple process. There are some eligibility requirements that relate to individual circumstances. So I believe if, for example, people are getting other government-related benefits, they may not be eligible. So I'd be very cautious about saying to your employees, look, you will get this payment, just do this and get the payment. I'd say I would use language like, I believe that you will likely be entitled to receive that payment, but don't, I would advise strongly not to give them a guarantee that they're going to receive that payment. If you are able to negotiate those sorts of arrangements with your employees, so a change to their current duties or their work location, particularly things like changes to work hours, be sure to document those. So make sure that there's an email exchange at least, or something of that nature that says, okay, look, I'm just confirming our discussion. I note that you're happy to take 2 days a week leave for the next couple of weeks. That's it. Now, ultimately, if that doesn't work and business is really difficult, you may need, unfortunately, to consider redundancies. That's the reality of it. There are occasions where if you just can't, if you're not getting the cooperation, or you're not able to get agreement from enough people, you're not able to move things around, and you've got money just flowing out the door, you may unfortunately just need to consider the redundancy option. So, and if you need help with that, let us know and we can talk you through that process.
Greg, a couple of questions there. One from me, and there's one from from Lauren. So, in terms of negotiating, I know this is not. We're not talking about stand down on this slide. It's really just business conditions in general, but obviously current conditions are poor. So, presumably, because of the government directive, the option of stand down now is available to a lot more people. Say construction. And if you have that discussion with your team and say that we need to stand you down, then obviously it then becomes easier to negotiate these other options with them. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's fair, I think. So part of the discussion that some of our clients are having with their staff, and this is where they feel that there's a valid there's a legitimate opportunity for them to stand down employees. Part of the conversation we're suggesting they have is, okay, guys, look, it's all turned to crap, and we feel that we are in a position to stand you down. That would be without pay. We understand how challenging that might be for you. So let's see what else we can do.
Yeah.
And in that case, they might sort of say, well, okay, look, I'm happy to reduce hours to half time for that period of time. And in that case, they would, they may well be eligible to claim for that COVID-19 disaster payment, which will top up their income for that period of time.
It's interesting you mentioned that there was a client that has negotiated 3 days a week instead of 5 days. That could mean that the staff members may not be eligible for the full COVID disaster payment because they may not reduce by 20 hours. So I suppose that's another consideration when making those, when discussing this with your team, that there is that extra benefit if they reduce by more than 20 hours.
Yep, that's a valid point. Yep.
And another question, I think that answers Lauren's question. Lauren said, just to clarify, if you're in a position to stand down your employees, can you stand down but still give them the option to take annual leave? Yes, we just discussed that, I think. Or is this only something you negotiate without stand down? So I suppose it's stand down comes into that whole negotiation option.
Yep. So an employee that's been given a stand down direction, they can then make a request to be paid annual leave for the part of or all of that stand down period.
Yeah. Okay. Another one, Ben says, confused about the business support payment, which supposedly helps to retain employees. Is standing down employees the wrong action to have taken? So my take on that is that I suppose if anything, standing down or reducing hours then helps the employee achieve that support. Without standing them down, they won't get the disaster payment that's available from the government.
Well, I don't believe that disaster payment is linked only to those that are on stand-down orders. I believe it's just a case of, okay, well, if you've lost hours because of COVID-19, you can potentially claim that disaster payment. So it could be, for example, the other the negotiation options that are on this page. The employer is trying to negotiate those changed arrangements with employees because it's a difficult time. So they say, well, guys, sorry, I can't offer you 5 days a week. I don't want to, I'm happy to do what I can. I think I can find you 3 days a week work. You can either take annual leave for the other 2 days, or unfortunately, we'll just need you to apply for leave without pay for that period. And in that circumstance, that employee, even though they're not stood down, they have lost hours. They've lost 2 days a week. They could potentially go and claim the disaster payment. So it's not contingent upon there being a formal stand down, I believe.
All right, we better move on. That's your your slides done, Greg. Anything else you wanted to add before we move on?
No, I don't think so. Just the general thing about, look, it is confusing. I do appreciate that, and there's many possible manifestations about how all this works. If you do need specific help, please reach out to us.
And for those that are that joined us late, if you do open up your chat box, hopefully you've already had that open, because there's quite a few questions and answers that are happening on the chat box. So Greg's colleague Margot is answering some questions, as are others that have some experience there. So really encourage you to look at that chat box. So thanks for that, Greg. What I'm going to do now is just go through very quickly through some summary tables and information about the government support that's available. The first one is this PDF that I shared through my database, and it's a New South Wales government document that does a very good job of explaining what is available. So there's the first couple of pages is support for individuals, which talks about this disaster recovery payment, and also some links here to some more information on the Services Australia websites. So it doesn't just cover the payments, it includes tenancy relief and so on. Then there's the micro business grant. Now I've got a summary table that I'll show you in a minute. That is applicable for businesses that turn over between $30,000 and $75,000. And there's obviously some details there about getting some support from your landlord. So it's a good document, this one. There's also the the COVID-19 business grant. That is for businesses that turn over between $75,000 and $50 million per annum. JobSaver, I'll talk to you about, I'll just cover off that as well. Then there's payroll tax support and so on. So it's a good little document here. I will be sharing this link again with you. So definitely look at that to get your head around what the different options are. However, it doesn't give a lot of detail, obviously, and even going to those links, these links here, doesn't always give you all the details, or it's quite complicated to work out what it all means. So I've just done this very quick summary table, which I'll run through. For those people that turn over less than $75,000, so 30 to 75,000, you get a fortnightly tax-free grant of $1,500. There's obviously eligibility criteria. One of those being a minimum 30% revenue drop, and I'll talk a little bit about how that's measured on the next slide. And that'll be paid from the 26th of June, which is when when the lockdown started. For most of us on this call here, this is the one that will apply. It's for businesses that turn over between $75,000 and $50 million. And depending on the level of revenue drop, and this is a revenue drop compared to 2 years ago, so it avoids the revenue reduction that you may have experienced during COVID last year, and that's why they're looking at the same period in 2019. And so if your revenue reduces by 30%, you get a $77,500 one-off payment. If it reduces by 50%, you get a $10,500 payment, and if it reduces by 70% or more, you get a $15,000 payment, okay? And this covers the first 3 weeks of lockdown. And the other important point is you need to maintain your headcount as it was on the 13th of July, okay? And then after this 3-week period, this is when JobSaver kicks in. And this covers from this week onwards. So after week 3, so this is week 4 of lockdown this week. And that will give you tax-free payments equal to 40% of your payroll. You get a minimum of $1,500 a week and a maximum of $10,000 per week if you employ staff, and $1,000 per week if you don't employ staff. And once again, you need to maintain your headcount as of 13th of July. Now, I'm not going to go through that in too much more details. If you do need to speak to your accountant, I really encourage that. They should be the ones that are across all of this. And a few clarification points around that government support, and also some of the information that Greg's covered. And these questions have come up from clients and through discussion over the last couple of days that Greg and I have had. Maintaining headcount, I think we've already talked about that. That includes staff that are stood down because technically they're still employed. Headcount includes New South Wales employed permanent staff and any long-term casuals that have been with you for 12 months or longer. The turnover drop test, so this is the 30% or 50% or 70% drop in revenue test. That's for a minimum period of 2 weeks between the 26th of June to the 17th of July. Now, I'll click on, I've got some links to all of the websites, the government websites that talk about this. The interesting thing is though, the guidelines that the government's put out were put out prior to the construction shutdown on Saturday. So the 17th of July is last week, whereas obviously the construction industry is only going to experience a slowdown this week and next week onwards. So as I've said there, these dates were set prior to the construction shutdown. So I would expect that this date will be extended to maybe the end of July, but don't quote me on that. But this is what the guidelines currently say. Now, if anyone who's on the call has more information, then feel free to add that to the chat. The turnover test, there's been some questions on whether it's based on invoices issued or cash received in this 2-week test period. It's based on your GST or BAS method. So if you're on an accruals basis, then obviously it's based on invoices. If it's on cash basis, then it'll be on cash. And another question people had was when individuals go in to apply for the disaster payment, it also has a criteria there that you need to use your appropriate leave entitlements first. And it's very confusing because obviously you would automatically think that those leave entitlements include annual leave. But I will click onto this one because when you go to this site, it specifically says that the appropriate leave payments relate to just these state pandemic payments and the pandemic leave disaster payment. I don't know anything about what the details are around that, but specifically it says that leave that's not included is annual leave, unpaid leave, and sick leave, and so on. All right, so this means you don't need to take these leaves into account as required leave that's need to be used before you get that disaster payment. All right, so it is very confusing. They haven't really worded that as well as they could have. But they've obviously been trying to rush all of this out, and I'm sure they'll make amendments to their guidelines. And at the moment, there's not much information about JobSaver. There's quite a bit of information about the. If I just go back a slide, there is quite a bit of information about the business grant, but JobSaver kicks off from this week onwards, and there's not a lot of information as yet. All right, so we are running out of time, but I might just, Greg, you want to just run through this one quickly? This was a question that was emailed to us yesterday from someone in the construction industry. Might just go through that very quickly, Greg, if that's okay.
Sure. Okay, so scenario A, the employee is casual and has no entitlements. So if they're stood down, yes, they should be able to apply for the COVID-19 disaster payment. What I would say there, though, I'd just qualify that by saying what I said in the presentation, which is that there are other criteria relating to eligibility concerning individual circumstances, such as, you know, they need to be aged over 17. They need to, there's something about receiving other government payments which may make you not eligible, etc. So you don't want to sort of say definitely, but certainly most people in that situation would be able to access that disaster payment. Scenario B, please help us to find appropriate leave. Yep, Anil's covered that. They have sick leave, annual leave, RDOs. They can use annual leave and RDOs if they choose to do so. You're only got an entitlement to sick leave where you are actually sick. It's not just to be drawn upon at any time just because it's there. Sick leave depends on you being sick or injured and unable to attend work, or providing personal care to somebody. So the annual leave and the RDOs, yes, it doesn't matter about which order. Not the sick leave unless they're actually sick or providing care. Mm-hmm. Can they choose leave without pay and claim the disaster payment? Yes, I believe so. Can they choose a paid leave entitlement, leave without pay? Yes, I believe is the answer to that question. Again, recognising what I said about the individual eligibility criteria. Scenario C, employees permanent, no leave. Yes, I believe so. Again, subject to individual criteria.
Okay, great. So I'd like to open up to general questions, and feel free to unmute yourself if you have any questions. Now, Josh in the chat box has commented that according to Service New South Wales, as of last night, you could use a 2-week period from, this is for the turnover test, turnover reduction test, 2-week period from the 12th of July to the 26th of July, which would definitely cover then this construction lockdown period. Now, Josh, I was on the I was on the websites quite late last night, so I must have missed that. But if you could shoot us a link, and I'll share that as well with everyone. Does anyone have any questions for myself or Greg? And we'll do our best to answer them.
Anil, just a quick question. I'm not sure if anyone's aware of this, but with the turnover test, is there an alternative test available? If you've got, for example, you've got a client who hasn't been in business long enough to have any. Yeah,
there is, Zoltan. I did see that last night. I'll send you some information about that, but there is a alternative period. I don't know if it's a specific test, but you can definitely apply for you know, some sort of a workaround if you haven't been in business for, you know, for that 2-year period. Yeah. Right. I'm not sure what the process is. Others on the call may know more, but definitely there's an option there for those businesses. Any other questions that you may have? Hopefully there's no questions because we covered it in so much detail.
Hi, Anil, it's Faith.
Yes, hi.
I put a comment in there, but Xero's got a COVID-19 business support calculator in their reports functions.
Okay,
it's similar to what they did for the JobKeeper. So it does have the 2 lots of dates in there that you can use. Great. And gives you the percentage.
All right, excellent. So definitely talk to your bookkeeper or accountant about that. I know Xero had a fantastic function in their last year, and it looks like they've introduced that again. Interestingly enough, I did it for myself last night. I listed down for every day between lockdown and now what revenue, what receipts I had in the bank, and then the same for the period 2 years ago from my bank statements. And it's quite interesting, you know, then I basically did some formulas to work out, well, for every day, looking at a 14-day period, how did this year compared to 2 years ago and what the percentage drops were. And it's not easy when you just look at it and just look at like, it doesn't need to be a normal Monday to Sunday week, for example. It could be Wednesday to Tuesday. So when you look at that, it's not automatically apparent if you've got a drop or not. So it is very, very tricky. So definitely, you may need to get someone who's good with numbers just to go through that with you. And I'm sure your accountant can help, but I'm sure they're also very, very busy at the moment. So I've got a few other questions here. So Jim said he can't see that in Xero. So maybe Faith, we can maybe point to that later on. I might just send a link a link to there must be a tutorial on Xero somewhere. Suzanne said here, Zoltan, yes, you can choose more appropriate comparative periods like July 2020 or another period if the business did not exist in 2019. Nita is asking, does an employee disaster payment claim affect the employer's ability to claim the 2021 COVID-19 business grant? My understanding is that no, it doesn't. They're totally separate. Obviously, the employee's disaster payment claim is dependent on them losing hours, and that's really independent of the eligibility criteria for the business grant. And Josh, can you clarify that if you are in a position to stand down staff, but not necessarily in cash flow position to provide annual leave payments, what is the best course of action? Greg, do you want to cover that one off? I'm not sure.
Yes, look, I think you're within your rights. I mean, it's challenging, but I think you're within your rights to not agree to the request for annual leave, just as you normally are. You're just saying, well, sorry, guys, can't afford it at the moment.
Yep.
And yeah, I appreciate that's difficult, but if that's what you have to do, that's what you may need to do.
And then the employee obviously has the, can apply for the disaster payment.
Correct.
To help them.
Yeah.
All right.
Can I just ask Greg a question?
Sure.
Just want to jump in and just clarify. I know it's general advice. So we're a construction industry, we're landscapers. So we've stood down the employees, we're the one with the text message. So I'm just clarifying. So next step would be to send them a letter via email to let them know the stand down is applied. They have the option to apply for any leave that they have entitled to them of annual leave and otherwise take it without pay. And then they can apply for the disaster relief payment. Is there anything else we should be doing other than that? And just get that back in writing, I guess, is what leave entitlements they'd like to take.
Yeah, look, I don't think you need to do anything beyond that, Nick.
Yep.
As I said, there is if you send me an email, I don't think I've got your email address, but if you send me something, I'll send you a link to that template later on the Fair Work website.
Yep. Thank you.
All right. If there's no other questions, I might close that off. Finally, I will send out an email just thanking everyone and sending you some links. I'll send you Greg's contact details in case you don't have those as well. And we're more than happy to have a chat to you and support you in any way we can. And just understand that, we're been inundated with questions and help, but definitely we'll definitely get back to you and help where we can. Greg, do you want to add anything to that before we wrap up?
No, you've said it all, Anil. We're here to help if we possibly can. There's plenty happening, but we'll certainly get back to you as soon as we can and provide whatever assistance you need.
All right, so thanks everyone for attending, and I'm sure we'll speak very soon.
See you all.